Hey everybody, new video here. It's another majestic INFJ. Welcome to the channel for those of you who are new, and welcome back for anybody who's not new. So this is going to be another sort of riff video where I'm going to just talk about introverted intuition mainly. Compare it a little to extroverted intuition, talk about what they are, um, and then also, I think one of the best ways to sort of think about this stuff or, um, understand it is to talk about the functions when they're sort of missing in a personality, or just aren't as prevalent. And that would be, in personality types where a particular function is at their polar or path of least resistance spot. So that would be, if you're talking about introverted intuition, which we will, that would be your ESFJs and your ESTJs, where introverted intuition is in their seventh slot. So sort of think of it as the opposite of their third function. And their third function is going to be extroverted intuition. And so, first, let me just sort of riff on generally what introverted intuition is, and also sort of compare it to extroverted intuition, which will be relevant when we talk about the ESTJs and the ESFJs. Um, okay, so introverted intuition is, the best way to describe it is just having quote unquote knowledge about something without learning it through direct experience. And direct experience could be something, that actually happens to you, some sort of episode or event, where you sort of gain new information about it. Or it could also just be, somebody just sort of telling you a rule or a fact, and you just sort of gaining that knowledge through the fact that somebody told you this fact or this little tidbit of knowledge, or you read it or picked it up somewhere. And introverted intuition, on the other hand, is taking all that information that we learn, whether it's sensory information or event, information from events, or information that we read from books, or watching YouTube videos, or going to class or whatever, taking those little facts and basically coming up with your pet theory. One of the good ways of thinking about introverted intuition is just people's pet theories. What sorts of quote unquote knowledge, and I say quote unquote knowledge because, to them it really is knowledge. It's something that they feel like they know, but they might have a hard time convincing other people of its truth or its validity, right? Um, and because in a lot of ways it's sort of their pet theory, right? They took a bunch of information about some particular topic and then synthesized it into a representation that sort of gets at the essence of the issue or the subject matter, and again you just sort of come up with this pet theory. So the MBTI, or cognitive functions, is a great example of it, right? There's plenty of descriptions of what an INFJ is or what an ESTJ is, and then also plenty of descriptions of what introverted intuition is, or extroverted intuition, or introverted thinking, so on and so forth. And you come across all these descriptions, and and somewhere in there, if you read 50 different descriptions that all sort of describe it in different ways, your introverted intuition is the mechanism that sort of sews all that information together, right? And tries to come up with some sort of framework or representation that takes all of the information and ties it together in some sort of coherent way, right? And it gives you your pet theory about, whatever the subject matter is, right? So your pet theory about what is an INTJ or what is introverted thinking, so on and so forth. And again, if it's personal to you, it's introverted intuition, so it's personal in some respects. And then, it really does come across internally as, this is just as factual to me as 2 + 2 = 4, or the sky is blue. Because I tied all this stuff together in my head, and it's now this sort of universal truth to me. And it might be hard to articulate it to other people and describe it in the way that you're thinking about it. But nonetheless, it's still just as true to you. And one sort of interesting side note is, I have to dig this up. It's been a while since I saw this study described, but there's some study out there where they were doing open brain surgery, and so they were sort of putting electrodes in somebody's head as they were conscious, right? And when you do that, you could sort of either activate parts of the brain or you can deactivate them depending on what you're doing. And what they would do is they would activate a certain part of the brain that makes the person believe whatever they're thinking or whatever they're hearing is true. And so, for example, the researcher could say something like, your name is James, and the person's name is not James, so it's just, factually untrue on a very objective way. But the person would believe it, right? Or they could sort of give them a story and, tell them that something happened to them when they were 5 years old or something, and just make up a story. But if they're activating that part of the brain, the person really believes that it's true, right? So there's this part of your brain, part of your psyche that is, that is activated, that sort of, creates this feeling of something being true, something being real. And I would argue introverted intuition, that's not all of it, but it ties that part of the brain into the overall system, or it incorporates it into the overall system or the overall process, so that when people come up with their little pet theories based off of the data that they've sort of put together, it's really hard to shake them off of those pet theories, right? Because again, I think they're incorporating that part of the brain that's telling them that this is true. I'll leave it to you guys to come up with your own pet theories of why that might be the case. But I just thought it was a pretty interesting fact about the brain that I think plays into the whole idea of introverted intuition. Okay. So introverted intuition is gathering all this data, coming up with some sort of representation, and reading between the lines and coming up with your theory of, how you think the world works or how this particular subject matter all ties together into some sort of universal truth or universal whole. And again, a good way to think about it is, everybody probably has some sort of representation or theory about what introverted thinking is, and like how to describe it and what its sort of core essence is. And that would be your introverted intuition, right? Unless you're just going to read an article or listen to somebody on YouTube telling you, hey, here's what introverted thinking is, and you just sort of repeat that verbatim, right? That would be more of an SI type of learning thing, right? Or representation. Okay, so you got your introverted intuition coming up with its pet theories about whatever. But then on the flip side, you've got your extroverted intuition, which is pretty much doing the exact opposite, right? And it's this interesting balance in your psyche, um, where the introverted intuition is coming up with some sort of core representation, tying everything together and saying, okay, here's a little tidbit of knowledge that I subjectively believe is true. And then the extroverted intuition is, I think, sort of playing a check on that and sort of tapping the brakes a little and saying, whoa, that may be true or it may not be, but let's think of all these other possibilities, right? So we could take the same data and think of different possibilities here. And so maybe your little pet theory might be true in some instances, in some contexts, but if you change the context or change the underlying circumstances, your theory might not hold up, right? So your extroverted intuition is thinking of all the other possibilities, and in a way, sort of playing a check on your introverted intuition. And it's not necessarily like your sensing functions, overriding your introverted intuition and saying, no, here's some actual data that conflicts with what what your pet theory is. It's more of, given all of the data that we have and everything that we put together, okay, yeah, your pet theory, your introverted intuition might be one way of looking at it, but here's, 10 other ways of thinking about it. Um, in academia, like in psychology and a lot of other fields like biology, physics, whatever, there's this concept of two different types of scientists or researchers. There's what they would call the lumpers and what they would call the splitters. And the lumpers like to take all of the data and try to come up with some universal theory that incorporates all of the data into one theory. And the splitters like to think of maybe there's multiple things going on and there isn't just one theory or one mechanism that explains all the data. And so a good example would be human memory, or just memory in the brain. Because there's lots of different types of memory, right? There's episodic memory, thinking of events that happened to you. What did you have for breakfast? Who was the last person that you had a phone conversation with, and what did you guys talk about? Where you're remembering specific events from your past or recalling them. And that's different from semantic memory, things like what's 2 plus 2, what's the capital of France, who was the third president, just sort of factual information where it's not really tied to an event so much as just facts that you've picked up along the way, and your brain, for whatever reason, has retained it, and you can pull it up and recall it in the future. But then also compare that to spatial memory, right? So remembering the layout of your house. Where's your kitchen? Where's your bedroom? Where's your bathroom in relation to each other? And then where's your house or your apartment in relation to, the downtown area? And where is your city in relation to Washington, D.C. or some other city? And that's all sort of spatial memory. And there are some people who would say all of those types of memory, your episodic, your semantic, and your spatial memory, is all tied to one underlying mechanism, right? And I won't get into what that is, but that there's a part of the brain that sort of does all that stuff, but it just does it in different domains. And then you could compare that to things like motor memory, remembering how to ride a bike, remembering how to drive a car, things that are just sort of automatic, that are only expressed through action or behavior. And then other people might throw in emotional memory, right? So So you have the lumpers who are trying to sort of incorporate different types of memory and say, hey, look, there's an underlying mechanism here that explains all these different types of memories. And then you have your splitters who will say, no, there's really, fundamental differences between these different types of memory. There's different parts of the brain doing those different things, and you can't really explain it with one unifying theory because, in essence, they're all just sort of different things. Okay. So hopefully that gives you a rough explanation of, the difference between a lumper and a splitter, right? Lumpers are trying to consolidate and synthesize things into one universal truth or theory, while other people are trying to sort of separate things and categorize them in, different sort of discrete packages and point out the differences in them. And I'd argue extroverted intuition is doing that splitting, right? It's looking at the differences, looking at, how these different things in different contexts and different situations can lead to different results or have different explanations. So you have 5 different memory systems or 6 different memory systems, and they're all doing their own thing, versus the lumpers who are trying to tie all that stuff together and say, no, there's really one sort of fundamental mechanism that explains everything. And if you just sort of think about it the way that I do, you would understand, right? And to me, I think that's a pretty interesting difference in personality types. Somebody who's much more of an extroverted thinker or has, uses their extroverted intuition more, is probably more likely going to be a splitter, right? They're probably more likely going to see differences in things as opposed to trying to tie them into one universal whole. Where, on the other hand, the introverted intuition, people who use introverted intuition more often, are going to be more of your lumpers, where they want to just sort of consolidate the data and come up with some general theory. It's not 100% across the board, but it's one way to think about it. Okay. So, with that sort of I think sort of want to talk about, if you're an intuition user, particularly introverted intuition, you might find yourself sort of, I don't know, rubbing elbows, or no, that's not the right phrase, but basically, getting into conflicts or sort of misunderstandings with other types that don't have strong introverted intuition. And in particular, the groups I'm going to pick on today are the ESTJs and the ESFJs, because with them, introverted intuition is polar, right? And in the socionics world, I think they talk about this as being a supervisee relationship, where the INFJ would be sort of a supervisor to an ESFJ. The idea being the INFJ's main prominent dominant function is introverted intuition, and so it just comes easy to them, right? And then with an ESFJ, they have polar introverted intuition, and so it doesn't come easy to them. And not only that, but a lot of times I just sort of don't understand where the INFJ is coming up with all this stuff. So let me give you a few examples, and we can sort of unpack that. So one thing that I'd like to say is there's basically 2 types of people in the world, right? Set aside the MBTI cognitive function stuff, but you can separate some people into sort of 2 groups. And I would say, there's sort of the people who just sort of rely on how things have always been done, and let's just keep, doing things the way we've always done them. Let's just call them traditionalists, right? And then there's the other people who are like, well, the ways that we have been doing things worked up until a point, but now they're no longer working. And so we have to think of something new or some new approach. And let's just call them the revolutionaries. Probably a little too strong of a word, but we'll go with it. So here's an example or a thought experiment. So imagine there's a tribe of people, a small town, back in the, way back in history. And they lived in on a small plain, and, they were an agricultural community, grew their own food, raised their own livestock, but, every year they would sacrifice virgins to their gods, right? And if they sacrificed enough virgins, then the food would grow, and, the livestock would survive, and everybody would have enough food. Along comes, some year where there's a famine, right? The food's not growing, there's a drought, there's not enough rain, because the food's not growing, the livestock's dying, and therefore the townspeople are running out of food and they're all starving. Okay. And then they got to figure out, okay, what are we going to do? And so the traditionalist, and well, let me say this, then along comes somebody who says, we could just pick up and move closer to the river or to this other area out, 5 miles out, and just relocate ourselves because that area is getting plenty of rain, the food is growing, and the animals, the food would grow and the animals would survive. So let's just pack up and move over there. But the traditionalists would say, well, I don't know. That's sort of rocking the boat. That's doing things different than how we've always done it. So really what we need to do is sacrifice more virgins, pray harder, and then the gods will, they'll hear us and they'll come back and they'll help us. So really what we need to do is just double down, buckle down, do everything that we've always done, but do it twice as hard, right? And then things will work out in the end because it's always worked out for us throughout history. And the revolutionaries are thinking, no, look, there's really a very easy solution here. Let's just get everybody, walk 5 miles, and just start over, at this new land that's a lot more productive. And the traditional, I don't know about that. There might be monsters out there. And, look, we've been doing this for generations. It's always worked out in the end. So let's just keep doing what we're doing. But let's just let's just double our efforts and, it'll all work out. And so you could see how this would just keep going back and forth, right? And to me, this is a fundamental sort of argument or difference between somebody who would have, dominant introverted intuition versus somebody who has polar introverted intuition, right? And so to sort of cut to the chase, I would see the ESTJs and the ESFJs as the traditionalists, right? Let's just keep doing what we've always done. Let's not rock the boat. Let's not, go crazy here and do anything different because we have no idea how that's going to turn out. But we do know, traditionally speaking, the way that we've always done it has worked up till now. So let's just keep doing it. Where the introverted intuition types, let's just say the INFJs, and probably throw INTJs in there as well, they've got their little pet theory, right? They've got their pet theory that, hey, we would be much better off if we just got rid of the old ways and packed up everything, walked 5 miles over closer to the river where the land is doing better, and just relocate, right? And if there's monsters or any other problems in that area, we'll deal with it when we get there. But trust me, we're much better off if we relocate. So that's their little pet theory. Um, so so you take it out of that sort of thought experiment and think about it in the real world. And you're going to see, if you're an INFJ or an INTJ or an introverted intuition dominant type, you're going to be struggling with this, pretty much your whole career until you finally just sort of accept that this is the way it works. Because there's a very, very good chance if you go into the corporate world or if you work for, a law firm or an accounting firm or some very traditional type of institution, an institution that's been around for a while, even if it's a new company, if they're sort of following traditional ways of doing business, it's very likely your boss and whoever's running the show is going to be an ESTJ or an ESFJ. They just have this natural tendency to gravitate into leadership positions, especially in institutions, because they are precisely the type that is not going to rock the boat, right? I mean, first of all, they have that lead FE or that lead TE, and so they're going to be competent people at their job. They're going to be highly competent, and so that's just sort of a given, right? Whatever their job is, they've got either a TE way or an FE way of handling their job, and they're going to come across as very competent one way or the other. And then they've got the introverted sensing and their second function, and that's their tool function. That's what they rely on to sort of quote unquote get the job done. And so they're going to rely on traditional rules, on things that they've experienced along the way, where it's either rules that people have told them, this is how a corporation works. This is how you sell, tiles, or, bathroom tiles, or this is how you sell cars, or this is how you run a law firm. These are the tried and true ways that have worked since time immemorial. Since the day that my grandfather founded this company, we've been doing it this way. Very, very traditional, very SI, rules-based type of problem solving. And not only that, but they're also going to remember every little time that they deviated from the rules and everything went to hell, right? And now there is a lot to be said, right? I'm in no way trying to attack them, because there's a reason for that they tend to gravitate towards leadership positions, is because they're very good at it, and they are very good at protecting the institution. And I think there is something to be said about an institution that's been around for decades. It's very hard to argue with success, right? And so you could see why people would want to sort of keep things going the way they have been. If you run into a problem, just double down. Just do what you've always done, but do it twice as hard. Sacrifice more virgins and pray, twice as much. And eventually everything will work out, because it always has in the past. And then you couple that with the poor INFJs and the poor INTJs, who are sort of in there in the background. They sort of see the problems boiling up, before they actually happen. For example, let me just pick an example from my area. In the legal world and law firm world, lawyers typically get paid by the hour. How many hours did you work on a particular project or case, and and we call that billable hours. How much time did you bill to this particular project? And then we get paid an hourly rate. And that worked for decades and decades, worked very well. But now everything, because of technology and just the fact that your average person, including your average lawyer, is just better with technology, more efficient, We can write our own documents. You can get on Google and find things that would have taken hours and hours in the past to find, and now you can find it on in 30 seconds on Google. And so lawyers are just way more efficient than they used to be, because of technology. And so it's harder and harder to make money just billing by the hour because what used to take somebody 3-5 hours is now taking 30 minutes, right? So there's this sort of fundamental problem, and the introverted intuition types, they see that, right? They see that as a problem, and they'll come up with their little pet theories of what a good solution is. If you have any, let me know. But different people have tried different things, but it's very, very hard to get all law firms to sort of change the way they've always done it, right? Because a lot of times, you have a lot of ESTJs, ESFJs running firms, law firms, accounting firms, businesses, you name it. And they're going to rely on the traditional way. And not only that, the other thing you have to think about is they have, polar introverted intuition. So not only are they not, sort of coming up with their own little pet theories of, what can we do different here, but I would say they have difficulty even understanding if somebody comes up with some, new theory on, here's how we can completely change the game and make money, or change our business process, or basically the way that we do business. You got the INFJs and the INTJs sort of raising their hand and saying, "Hey, I was thinking about this the other day, and here's what I would do." If you present that to an ESTJ or an ESFJ, it really is almost like going in one ear and out the other, because they don't have that introverted intuition in the same way that the INFJ and INTJ do, where there's sort of this aha sort of feeling, this sort of like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense, let's do it. And in fact, they have extroverted intuition in their third slot, right? So that's their third function. And that's largely considered your role function. And oddly enough, it's kind of, often described as if you've got a job, it's kind of the function you often use for your job. And so what they'll do is they'll turn on that extroverted intuition, and they'll just think of all these reasons for why your little pet theory and the solution that you've come up with isn't going to work, right? They're going to be like, well, what about this, and what about that, and what about this, and what about that? And so it just sort of, and it's like the traditionalists in my thought experiment saying, well, what if there's monsters there? What if there's other people that are already there? What if it's, the rain is just as bad there as it is here? So let's just keep doing what we're doing, because there's all this uncertainty out there that could arise, and that uncertainty outweighs your certainty, Mr. INFJ or INTJ, right? Like, we understand, you really think that, picking us all up and moving closer to the river is going to solve our problems, but here's 10 different, things that may or may not be true. We don't know, but we'd rather, just stick with the devil that we know than having to deal with the uncertainty of picking up and moving, or changing our entire business model, or changing the way that we do business, because there's so many things that could go wrong. We might as well just stick with what we've always been doing, and that's the SI part, right? So that's another reason why ESTJs and ESFJs tend to gravitate towards leadership positions in large institutions, because they are not going to rock the boat. And if anybody comes along, like your INFJ or INTJ, who, or your ENTJs, you guys out there too, who comes along and says, hey, I've got a great idea, let's try this. They're going to push back and just be, well, that's not the way that we've always done it. And there's all this uncertainty because their NE is turned on. So let's just stick with the way that we've always done it. So really the only way to convince the ESTJs and the ESFJs of doing things any differently is if you can point to examples of other firms or other businesses in the same, sort of field or domain that have done it this other way, the other way that you're proposing. And then they'll look at it, and now this is more of an SI issue rather than an NI issue. They're not just thinking about it in the abstract, right? Like NI would do. Instead, they're actually seeing real data, right? Here's all these other firms that did it, and they saw 30% growth, their first year, and then 50% growth their next year. And so now you've got real SI data that they can rely on. Now, their NE is still going to be a little like, I don't know. Let's not, change everything overnight, but maybe we'll take little baby steps towards that. So, if you are a NI dominant type and you find yourself working in an institution, you're gonna have to just accept the fact that that's how institutions run. And institutions protect themselves by putting ESTJs and ESFJs in charge, because they're not going to rock the boat. They're going to protect old traditional ways of doing things. And so they're going to protect the institution. And not only that, but if they get any sort of whiff of change, or if anybody proposes change to them, their NE is going to kick in and they're going to think of all the reasons not to do it, right? And they probably won't argue on the merits of what you want to do, of like whether or not your pet theory is just absolutely crazy and completely illogical. Instead, it's more of a like, look, I get it, you're smart, I understand where you're coming from, but let's not go crazy here. Let's first deal, we've got all these uncertainties that where it could end up doing more harm than good. So let's just keep doing the thing, doing it the same way we always have. And so if you're an INFJ or an INTJ, you're going to be constantly dealing with that battle. You're going to constantly, or an ENTJ or ENFJ, you're going to see ways that the system is sort of inefficient, or it could be you could be doing it better, or you could be doing it more efficiently, or making more money or something. But if it's different from the traditional ways of doing it, you're going to have a very hard time convincing anybody of it. And so what the best thing to do is to find other examples out there of other firms that have done some, either what you're proposing to do or something very similar, right? And it's probably just a good idea to do it in anyway, right? Because you might find that other firms have tried doing your way of doing it, your new way of doing it, and they failed miserably, and they all went out of business. And you might as well learn that early. And so then maybe you can either fine tune your pet theory, or you can just completely disregard it and go back to the drawing board, so to speak. And trust me, if there are other businesses out there that tried it your way and failed miserably, the ESTJs and the ESFJs will find it, right? And they will find it quickly, and they will throw it in your face and say, see, so-and-so down the street tried it that way, and it was a disaster for them. So let's just keep doing it our way. Okay, so that's the sort of interplay between introverted intuition and polar, or dominant introverted intuition and polar introverted intuition, where you're just going to have this sort of disconnect on your pet theory, right? the ISTJs, the ISFJs, they'll get it, right? Because they've got introverted intuition down at the, well, for them, that would be the A slot, and that is just the way that the socionics and all that works. The A slot isn't as bad as the 7th slot as far as sort of paying attention to it. And so the ISTJs and the ISFJs, they'll be like, oh, yeah, that sounds good, but I'm going to defer to my ESTJ boss or my ESFJ boss and see what they think. Because they'll get it, they'll appreciate it, they might even encourage you, but they're certainly not going to put their neck on the line and push for it, right? They might encourage you to push for it, like, oh, that sounds like a really good idea. You should talk to so and so about it. I think that would be really great. But they're not going to pick up the mantle, and fight for your cause, right? So I guess that's really about it. I mean, like I always say, take it for what it's worth. But hopefully, this helps explain not only what introverted intuition is on sort of a general level, but also how it sort of works in practice. When you have somebody with strong introverted intuition sort of conflicting with the people who have polar introverted intuition and don't really trust it all that much, especially when they see it in other people. Okay, so that's really about it. I welcome your comments, especially if anybody's got an example of, one of these conflicts. And again, I'm not trying to bag on the ESFJs or the ESTJs because they've probably protected institutions from bad ideas way more than, rejecting good ideas, right? And so it's probably worked out in their favor historically. And there's a reason that they become the boss, and you don't put the, crazy-eyed INFJ in there with all their crazy new ideas. They serve as a good check, and sort of the more you're in the working world as an INFJ or an INTJ, you'll gain more of a respect for it, because you will see people try to do, crazy new things and fail miserably, and part of you is like, oh, thank God that wasn't me. So, cheers to the ESTJs and the ESFJs of the world, keeping us all on track. All right. Welcome any comments, and I'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.